Greetings and welcome to the Building Men Podcast, a ministry of Iron Sharpens Iron. You can also see the video on YouTube.
And this is Brian, Rex, and Thomas. We're together building brotherhood with one another and talking about brotherhood. Today we're going to talk about one of the missing ingredients in church-based men's ministry, which is relationships. Men building relationships with other men. What's that look like? And so we're going to title this, Get a Cup of Coffee. Have a cup of coffee. Invite a man to have a cup of coffee with you, non-threatening. You're not there to drill him. You're not there to train him. You're not there to cross-examine him. You're there because you enjoy him and you want to get to know him better. So, Thomas and Rex, where do you start? You're a guy and you're kind of loosely connected with a bunch of acquaintances in the local church. What's the next step for a guy?
For me, it's just simply invite him. You know, I think so many times we see a guy that we can see maybe struggling or going through something or having a difficult time, just whatever the case may be. And we go, oh, well, you know, and I think one of the things is we've got to stop saying no for men. You know, when you know you should invite him and you don't invite him because you don't think he's going to show up, you just say no for him. And we've got to stop saying no for these guys, you know. But I just really think we've got a lot of guys in their churches that would just love to have a guy that they could meet with, talk with, share with, and just kind of start doing life together. So.
Why do you think? Why do you think we say no? You mentioned this saying no. Why do you think a man would say no to inviting another man to get a cup of coffee or something like that? What would be some of those reasons?
Yeah, one reason might be a false impression or motivation that the guy you're asking might have. He may be thinking you have an agenda outside of just simply wanting to connect. But I think you have to be very intentional about making the fact that the first connection, particularly the first connection, is really about just connecting. You're not looking to disciple. You're not looking to mentor. You're not looking to, like you said, put them on the interrogate. Not looking to put them under the hot lights. You're just looking to connect.
Yeah, and I think the other reason is I hear this a lot is well, I don't know enough scripture. I don't know enough this. I don't know, you know, nobody wants to hear what I have to say, you know, and things like that. And I mean, for me, you know, I just simply say, hey, man, you want to go get a cup of coffee together? And he says, well, what do we get? I said, you know, we'll just maybe look at a devotional together or something. You know, there's a lot of good devotionals that come on the phone and just kind of an easy way in, you know what I'm saying? And I think, it doesn't have to be a Bible study. It doesn't have to be some in-depth theological thing. It's just a simple little devotional that you just kind of share together. It's, you know, it's a great way to start, you know, and it's a great icebreaker as well. So
one of the things that I've done in my local church that seems non-threatening is ask a guy about how it's going at home. I'll say something like this. So what are the ages of your kids? Again, I just did this. And they tell me, you know, it's like 7, 9, and 11. I go, huh. I'd love to hear more about them. You want to get a cup of coffee sometime? And love to hear more about how it's going with you and your family. Now, a guy could say no to that. But why would he say no? I mean, for another man who's interested in him, his family, then if the guy's saying no to me there, then I have to take a look in the mirror and say, how am I coming across to men? I would say one of the things that that my wife helped me with is that I would kind of be borderline intense, at least in her words.
no,
I thought I was just kind of happy-go-lucky, but apparently it doesn't come across that way to everybody. And she go, you just need to relax a little bit and smile more and just invite guys to get a cup of coffee. So if I do that and I, show some interest in them and their family, I've never had at this point, I don't want to jinx myself, but I've never had a guy say no to that.
Yeah.
We sometimes have a challenge of finding a time and place. But that's another thing, guys. I don't know what you've seen about this, but when I bring time and place into it, that will often get me a no
Yep.
because
Yes.
I'm not a morning person. I'm not available in the morning. I don't live on your side of town. But if I just throw it out there,
Yep.
and then we have to figure it out. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, one thing
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that's helped me with that, Brian, I've been doing this for a couple of months now, is I give the guys I have 3 slots on my calendar that is open for this very purpose. And I leave them open for this very purpose. So I can always slot a guy in on Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, or Friday afternoon. And then I have 4 places where I can meet them. All depending on where they live in Connecticut. One place in Southington, one place in Newington. This means nothing to our audience unless you live in Connecticut. One place in Cheshire, and one place in Plainville. But they're all within a 30 mile radius of pretty much anything in the area. So I found that to be very helpful, giving them 4 options to meet and 3 options of days and times to meet too. I've never had a guy say no once I've given them those options. It does help.
One of the other things I found too is it's a lot easier to get 2 guys than it is to get 1 guy sometimes too. So,
Why would that be?
well, I'll just go to 1 guy and say, "Hey, I was thinking about just getting a cup of coffee with, with Bill and just want to invite you." And what we've done is now we've dropped the guard. He knows now that we've got an extra guy in there, so it's not just going to be about him. He's not going to sit there and think he is going underneath of the interrogation light, and things like that. So, I've just kind of found sometimes, the bringing the extra guy in is sometimes it's just really easier, to get commitment as well. And, especially when you tell them, said, look, so we really just don't have an agenda. Let's just get together and, maybe we'll look at a devotional together over a cup of coffee or something like that. Non-threatening. Everybody knows what we're going to do. The agenda's set. Now it's just a matter of finding the place to meet and the time to meet. And, I've just found out that's easiest, for me. So.
Right. I think also for the guys who are listening today, one of the things we had an online group last night. And again, I'm reinforcing one of our very early Iron Sharpens Iron speakers was Howard Hendricks, who wrote a book called Iron Sharpens Iron. And in his book, he made a big deal out of the different type of relationships that men might get a cup of coffee with.
Yep.
He would use those terms like get a cup of coffee. He'd say, get a cup of coffee with a guy who's a step ahead of you.
Yep.
Look for that guy. That guy's a step ahead. Maybe he's got kids a little bit older. Maybe he's, just been a Christian a little bit longer. Maybe he's a little farther down in his marriage. Get a cup of coffee with a guy like that. And get a cup of coffee with a guy or two that's pretty much in the same season of life that you're in. You're living life together. You've got a lot of the same stuff going on because maybe you're the same age, kids the same age, live in the same part of town, maybe, same church, same company. But don't forget to get a cup of coffee with a younger man, maybe younger in age or maybe just younger in the Lord, a new guy that hasn't had the experiences you've had, hasn't been discipled like you have, hasn't sat under good teaching for as long as you have. So he's still new. He's still kind of gaining traction in his walk with God. Don't forget, get a cup of coffee with that guy as well. So I'm thinking a guy who's a little bit sad, a guy that's kind of your peer, and then a guy that's not quite where you're at. I mean, all those are legitimate cups of coffee.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just finished a seminar that I've been working on. It's called Don't Clock Out, Clock In. and I think a lot of times, guys, that we really think we really miss the point is that one day we, our elders, pastors, whoever, we're going to hand the keys over to their church doors to the next generation.
Yeah.
What would that look like in your church right now? And I just think we've got a lot of older guys that have got a lot of wisdom
Right.
sitting here that have clocked out.
Right.
And next generation, we need to start pouring into that generation and helping raise them up and help them understand that what you see in the world is not really the world. And I make this statement. I sent it to you yesterday, and it says, a cup of coffee may not change the world, but a cup of coffee, when you invest in another man, could change the world. And I think so many times we forget about the power of an older man pouring himself. It's all Bible, it's all through the Bible of older men pouring themselves in. And I just think we really have to understand that, this younger generation, they're looking for a guy to be real with them. They're looking for a guy to listen to them, with the intention of not to fix them, but just listen to them. And they're looking for an older guy that will help them navigate this thing called life and not make all the stupid mistakes we make. But the biggest part of it is we've got to stop lecturing and we've got to start talking.
Yes.
Well,
So what's the difference between talking and lecturing?
well, lecturing is that you should or you need to, or I think you might want to look at doing this or whatever the situation is. And talking is just this, have you ever considered or have you ever thought, or let me tell you a lesson I learned, with that. And it's kind of, you're not pointing fingers at them, but you're just kind of making the wheels turn, And one of the things I love to tell the younger generation is hey, let me tell you one of the biggest life lessons I've learned. Better decisions will equal fewer regrets.
Yeah.
That right there has their attention because they're all about fewer regrets.
Yep.
And I think what Rex is saying is so good. A big part of the not lecturing and talking, a big part of that is asking good questions.
Yes.
And when you're having a cup of coffee in a atmosphere where you're talking to someone who's behind you, I think it's okay to let them wrestle with some things. Ask some question, just let them wrestle with it. Don't necessarily come in with forging with an answer. Where let them wrestle with it for a little bit. Maybe let them wrestle with it for a week or so. And I think there's a lot of power, and that also does a lot to getting you connected to the person and building that connection. Is asking those good questions. No, Rex said something before the call I wanted him to touch on, and that was you had used a cup of coffee almost as an evangelistic tool, almost. But yeah, could you share your little story that you shared with us? Because I thought it was really, really powerful. I think we missed this.
So I was in the doctor's office last week and 2 weeks ago and checking my numbers, making sure all of that stuff's good. And this guy was sitting in there, and I looked over at him, and I said, I could just tell he was, and I said, hey, man, don't get discouraged. And he looked at me, and he says, how can you not? And I said, look, I'm just going to tell you, I don't know where you are with God. I don't know where all that is, but I'm just telling you, when you get through this, it's going to be a story, And I said, if you ever feel yourself drifting down that road, call me. Here's my number. Give me a call.
Right.
We landed at Indy, and I had a text message, and it says, hey, can we meet next week? So we met on Thursday morning, and, and I think so many times that, Thomas, with this is I didn't go in there with my King James Table Bible. I didn't go in there, with 42 pages of notes that I wanted to cover. I just went down in there and sat down and just did what Yo and Brian were talking about is hey, what's going on, man?
Right.
How, what are you struggling the most with? And I just really think that we've got guys out there that are just getting beat up and things like that. And we just are not paying attention to that guy in our church that's walking around with his head down, the guy in our church that's got the big bags under his eye, the guys in our church that are just kind of standoffish, you know.
Yeah.
We're just not paying attention to those guys, and usually it's those guys that's got something going on inside of them.
We had a conference years ago in Columbus. No, it wasn't in Columbus, but the pastor, because the men's conference was from Columbus, Pastor Scales, and he would talk about, he's a shepherd, he's a pastor, but it's not just pastors who shepherd. We're men, we shepherd people. That's what Christian men do. And he talked about one of the distinctives of his church-based men's ministry was they kept track of men.
Yep.
They kept track of men. They kept track of men who showed up and who didn't show up.
Yep.
They had a regular entry point. This is a reason why, if you're having a church ministry to men, you want to have an entry point. So you have a place for guys to show up.
Yep.
Well, this one guy hadn't showed up for a couple of weeks. And so Pastor Scales sent a couple of guys that go, hey, Tom hasn't been here for a couple of weeks. Joe and Pete, go track down Tom. I'm thinking like, who does that?
Right.
Who does that? In an American culture where you live and let live, and especially if you're a grown man who's a husband and a father and a business owner, who tracks down other men? I just was profoundly challenged that I am not keeping track of the men, and I'm a leader in my church. I'm not keeping track of the men who are showing up and not showing up, and I need to be doing that.
It's so fun. I was in Connecticut. I was doing a men's ministry leader training, and I had a pastor call me, and he says, hey, what are you doing Friday night? And I said, we're not doing anything. And he said, would you come to my church? I've got a select group of guys I want you to talk to. And I said, sure. I said, what do you want me to talk to? He said, talk about us. He said, I'll tell you when you get there. That's never good. Okay. But I walked in and looked around the table, and the youngest guy at the table was 63 years old. The oldest guy at the table was 84. And count, including him, it was 12 guys sitting at the table. And he says, I want you to tell them how to reach our second service. I got up out of the chair and I simply walked over and I picked up a coffee cup. And I said, this is one of the greatest tools. I said, but the sad part is too many of you in between service, as soon as your service is over with, you run out of the door because you got to meet the other denominations to the restaurant for breakfast. And I said, what would it look like if you hung around? What would it look like if you went over and you stood at that door and you held it open for all the families coming in with all 14 kids? What would it look like if you just made yourself available, standing in the hallway, standing in the foyer around the round tables? He called me about 3 weeks later and he says, Rex, he said, I've never seen anything like it. He says, out of the 12 guys that were sitting at that table, he said 6 of them have got it, and 6 of them are just, he said, it's amazing of what's happening. And I think a lot of it is that we forget is that availability will beat ability every time.
Yep. Availability
will beat ability every time.
Availability, right?
Yep.
That's right.
We just have to make ourselves available and not put such a high and rigid agenda on what we're doing and just keep it simple. I think that's what Jesus did, didn't he? He met people where they were and took them to a place on a journey, and lives changed. And I think that's what we have to do as men's leaders, as men's guys and things like that. And even just as a church guy, we just have to pay attention to what's going on around you. One of the dead giveaways is a new guy that comes in your church. The first thing he does is he looks up and he looks for signs. That's a new guy. Pay attention to him. Walk over to him and say, hey, can I help you? If they've got kids, walk them up and show them where the nursery is. Those little moments become some of the biggest moments in their lives.
That's right.
You know, and we just forget. I think so many times, Brian, we talked about this. I think so many times we're more focused on trying to build a men's ministry in our church or program instead of trying to just build men.
That's right.
You know, and I think sometimes we have to take a slow look back, like you said, take a couple steps back and look at all the men we're missing because we say no for them.
You know, the scripture uses this word a lot throughout the New Testament. For sure, Paul uses it. The word encourage. Just encourage you. Just being an encouraging man, inviting another man, taking a cup of coffee. That first of all, that shows interest.
Yep.
Like you said, shows availability. I'm looking to Hebrews 3. Encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today, so you won't be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Sin is deceitful. Sometimes you don't even know that it's just tearing you down. It's eating your lunch from the inside out. And what do you need? You need a man who's walking with God, who has interest in you as a man of God and sees beyond you. We're talking about men getting a cup of coffee with other men, but we all know that when you build that man, when you encourage that man, when you uplift that man, that positive ministry goes straight back into his home life with the people that he loves the most.
And you know, the funny part is the last 2 weekends I've closed out with what we call the 60-day challenge. And you know, it's funny because both weekends I've had men that have come by me at the end of the day and says, "Thank you for challenging me. I would have never done it." And in that challenge is where at the end I get all the men that agree to go all in is to raise their hands. And I tell them to keep their hands up and look around the room and find another guy they know that will commit for the next 60 days and hold each other accountable for taking that one step further in their relationship with God, their family, their work, and their legacy. And, you know, it's
I would also say, when I think about this, that when I ask a guy, "Hey, I'd love to hear more about what's going on in your life, your ministry, your work. I heard you got a promotion. How's it going at home? How do you like the area of town that you're living in?" Whatever it might be. It doesn't need to, it can sometimes just be one cup of coffee.
That's it. Yep.
Sometimes it's just one encounter.
Yep.
You know, and so I challenge myself to sometimes reach out to guys. I reached out to a guy here at a new place, and he works from home, but he sometimes goes into a coffee shop. I go, "I'd love to see where you're at." So we went. We just had one time together, but it was encouraging. You know, he's on the road a lot. Kind of a tough guy to corral. I'm not really looking to corral him, but the time we had together was planting the seeds of a friendship.
Yep.
And I think before you become friends, you first got to get acquainted with someone.
Absolutely.
And so getting a cup of coffee is a chance to get acquainted with someone who might someday become a friend, and then who might someday become a brother, a real friend, a friend who sticks closer than a brother.
And Brian, you know, you remember back years ago, that old baseball diamond, you know, we all used to do it. You know, the first one is first base is acquaintances, the second base is friends, third base is brotherhood, and home is Christ-like, you know. It's that base path, you know, and not every guy that you ever have a cup of coffee with will move from acquaintance to a friend. There's some are. And then you've got some guys that will take the whole journey, you know, and I think don't discount, just like you said, Brian, I think it's so important is don't miss out on just the acquainted cup of coffee. You know,
And the platform, one of the big things that we all enjoy doing is helping churches develop their own ministry to men. And that might be, some kind of regular quarterly thing. But the point is not the quarterly thing. The point is to get men in the same place so they can reach out and get acquainted with one another and make that invitation to a cup of coffee. if you're scrambling and you got kids and wives on a Sunday morning, well, when you do get together with the men of your church, the follow through that really takes that entry point, and as Thomas would say, you create the momentum, and then you capture the momentum by getting a cup of coffee. That individual relationship that could develop into a friendship is worth putting on the event.
Yep. Exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
It certainly.
Well, let me pray toward that end. Lord, I pray for myself, for Rex, for Thomas, that we wouldn't say no for people, that we put ourselves out there. Would you give us courage
Yes.
in those moments that we need it to put ourselves out there and simply make an invite to a man? And I pray for the men that are joining us today. They would do the same. Would you help us to be courageous men who value friendship with other men, who want to spur them on to love and good works, who see men as you see them, leaders and influencers in their home and church and community. We want to be vessels of noble use. So I pray today that you'd give us an application, bring someone to mind this week that we can invite to a cup of coffee.
Yes.
In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right.
All right, guys.
Okay, good.